Good afternoon on this very somber day of October 7th. Welcome. I am Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I welcome you on behalf of members of our leadership team, which includes former Congressman Mel Levine and former LA County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. And thank you and welcome to today's guests, Bob Shrum and Mike Murphy, and of course, to our wonderful moderator, Patt Morrison. Just a quick reminder about next Wednesday's program. Rick Hasson will be speaking about can we anticipate a peaceful transition of power in January 2025. Aside from being within the 10 very somber days of repentance between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, today is October 7th, the one-year anniversary of the horrible terror attack by Hamas at the Gaza border, in which 1,200 people were killed and hundreds were taken hostage, many of whom have since also been murdered. In the spirit of the one-year anniversary of October 7th massacre, in the email which you will receive right after tonight's program, we have provided two articles that we commend to you. One is yesterday's column from the New York Times. Bret Stephens wrote it, called "The Year American Jews Woke Up," and we send it to you without a paywall. And the other is "The Impact of the October 7th Events on the Israeli Psyche" by Yossi Klein Halevi. You'll get the links to both of those after the program today. In commemoration of the events of October 7th, we have asked Rabbi Ken Chazen of West Los Angeles' Leo Beck Temple to share words of remembrance with us. After Rabbi Ken speaks, we will go directly to Patt Morrison to begin our program. So thank you both to Rabbi Chazen and to Patt again for being with us. Wishing all who celebrate a meaningful Yom Kippur full not only of self-reflection, but also of hopes and dreams that 5785 will bring better times than this year has. Rabbi Ken Chazen.
Thank you so much, Janice, and good evening to you all. It would be impossible to engage fully in tonight's program without acknowledging the day on which it's being held, a day that will forever carry remembrances that shatter the heart. And so let us begin by centering the voices of our Israeli brothers and sisters, to lift up their experience of this day and this year. I offer these words entitled "Good Day," Yom Tov, Yom Tif, by Israeli poet Tal Shavit. I want to manage all the war rooms, mobilize all the supply chains. I want to take care of all the children, all the single mothers and those who are gone. I want to turn myself into protective vests for all the fighters, become iron domes over the heads of all the girls, each and every one, to sustain all the families, the evacuated, the broken, the crushed. Return those who were taken. Bring back all that is gone. I want to collect all the donations and take them where they belong, to pass all the messages, to make all the sandwiches, to oversee all the efforts. But on a good day, I manage sometimes to breathe, sometimes to drink, sometimes to call loved ones. On a good day, I manage sometimes to cry. Let today be a good day in which we can breathe, drink, call loved ones, even cry, and, like the hostages who remain imprisoned in Gaza, sustain our belief in tomorrow, refuse to capitulate to despair, and cling to life and all of its persistent possibility.
Rabbi Chazen, thank you very much for that. We also want to thank you for joining us on this solemn day, a day which marks, well, fewer than a month, less than a month now before the presidential and other elections. The down ballot elections, too, tend to get overlooked in a presidential election. But we're looking tonight at the top of the ticket, the presidential campaign, with a couple of people who are familiar to you who watch this program. Bob Shrum directs the Center for the Political Future and is Warsaw Chair in Practical Politics at USC, where he is also a professor of the practice of political science. He's consulted many Democratic campaigns, including the 2000 and 2004 presidential campaigns, has been a speechwriter for such Democratic politicians as Bill Clinton. Michael Murphy is a Republican political consultant who has advised John McCain, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Christy Todd Whitman, and Mitt Romney. Recently an entertainment industry writer. You can hear him in the Hacks on Tap podcast, and his Twitter profile describes him as an infuriated GOP strategist. We may get some of that fury this evening. So, gentlemen, thanks for coming back again. You're most welcome.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. We're excited.
Apropos of what Rabbi Chasen was talking about, both candidates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, were campaigning and speaking about the events of last October 7th, and the Jewish vote has figured large in some of the rhetoric that's been going on. Donald Trump has said that Jews who don't vote for him would have a lot to do with his loss if I'm at 40%. And he told radio host Hugh Hewitt, I think Israel has to do one thing. They have to get smart about Trump. Vice President Kamala Harris planted a pomegranate tree on the vice presidential residence grounds today. She, in a brief speech, condemned the attack of October 7th as an act of pure evil and said the scores of hostages remaining in Hamas hands should be released. So perhaps let's start with Bob about how this vote figures so large in the presidential campaign.
I think the contrast between the vice president's statement and Donald Trump's statement tells you a lot about the character of this campaign. I mean, basically, on the Hugh Hewitt show, Donald Trump said, listen, I've done so much for the Jews. The Jews need to do something for me. They owe me. I think she actually spoke in a way that resonated with the sorrow and solemnness of this day and with the role of a leader, whether president or vice president of the United States. I think Trump's frustrated. I mean, he doesn't understand why he can't get like 90% of the vote from Jewish Americans. He's not going to get 90%. He'd be lucky to get 25. He may get 20. But I find it an incredible window on the kind of campaign he's running, which is to appeal to people's fear, to make up alternative facts, which aren't facts, and to basically threaten folks if they don't support him.
Mike, where does all this size up for you as far as the campaign and the attention being paid to the Jewish vote and to Israel?
Right. Well, I think in the two statements, I think Bob made a good point. It's always that tension between, what is and what ought to be. And what ought to be is a tone more like Vice President Harris's. This was an act of barbarism. It was an attack on all civilization. It was a murder orgy. And I think we need to understand that. I think she understands the nuances of it. Donald Trump is very transactional in his politics, which is why he's saying silly things like that. He said things like that about, people of my Catholic faith too. You'd be idiots not to vote for me. But as you go to what is from what ought to be in the conduct of a president, this is one of many issues in a razor-thin presidential race. And Trump is trying to create the perception that he will be a more aggressive ally of Israel than Vice President Harris. Now, I think she's made it pretty clear in her convention speech, where she actually moved to the right of Trump on foreign policy issues, that she will be a steadfast ally of Israel. But the politics of this are complicated. They really shouldn't be, but we're in the funhouse mirror world of politics now. And in Michigan, a state with a very large Arab American population, the largest, it's complicated. Now, I think it was overwritten about Muslim Arab Americans having some kind of sympathy for Hamas. And I think we saw in the results in the primary of Joe Biden, that really wasn't so. We're talking about 1% of the vote in Michigan, a state that may decide who wins the presidency. But as the war now widens into Lebanon, the larger of the two Arab American votes in Michigan, and the media misses this nuance, are Christian Lebanese and Chaldean Syrian Christians who have not been natural allies of any of the extreme Muslim rhetoric coming out of even some corners and the progressive movement in America. Interestingly, if you talk to anybody in counterterrorism, they're very grateful for that community in Michigan because that's where they recruit a lot of native Arab speakers that work with the FBI and other places to keep us safe. But now that Lebanon is under attack and the Christian population is in more potential danger as the war explodes, there's becoming growing concern about why can't this end? And the Israelis are often portrayed in an unfavorable light. I violently disagree with that myself, but politics is the world of what is perceived. So the stakes in Michigan are getting a little more complicated on this issue for Harris and for Friends of Israel.
For all that Trump is trying to position himself as the friend of Israel in this race, we have seen since Charlottesville the ripple effects of his candidacy, ugly anti-Semitic rhetoric, beginning with the Jews will not replace us. And just recently, the photo of the mayor of Asheville, North Carolina, a town devastated by Hurricane Helene, was posted with her name, her surname Mannheimer, and the caption, "Yes, she is," meaning yes, she is Jewish. And that's all it took to set off a storm of controversy again and bring some of these anti-Semitic sympathizers out into the open. Maybe, Bob, do you want to address that first?
Well, look, I think a lot of this has always been there, but it's been hidden under a rock most of the time. Trump licensed people to come out from under the rock. He licensed people to do the kinds of things we saw in Charlottesville, to do what you just described in that post, and I saw it too. And that's why, for me, this election is so fundamental. The question is whether or not we're going to move ahead as a country. And I thought Liz Cheney said this very well, with respect for democracy and with hope in our future, or whether we're going to begin to destroy democratic norms and to try to appeal to the worst, darkest impulses of people. And that's what I think Donald Trump has done. It worked for him in 2016, although he was more coherent then than he is now. I do not think it will work for him ultimately in 2024, although Mike's right. It's a razor-thin election, and it could go either way. At the end of the day, maybe because I believe so strongly in America, what it's about and its principles, I think it will probably go the right way.
And Mike, what about that?
Yeah, I think it really is razor thin. It's been creeping in her direction, but only creeping. And, this thing is going to go down to, it could break for one of them late. I think the one thing in the foreign policy domestic politics equation that worries me as a right-wing nut has publicly endorsed Kamala Harris, I'm an anti-Trumper from way back, is the Trump people are running an aggressive television campaign accusing her of weakness, and Trump's brand is strength. And I do worry that when the world is in disrepair, there's a perception that Trump's kind of, I'll hammer them. They're never going to do anything to me. I'll call that Ayatollah and he'll back down. I'm a tough guy. I'll seal the border. She's failed on the border. There is some strength in that message. It's kind of fictionalized, but that doesn't matter in politics. It's what's perceived to be true. So I worry about all this turbulence in the world opening up a weakness vulnerability on Kamala Harris. I thought they addressed it well at the convention speech. I'm hoping to hear more as she finally rolls out to the media this week. They've been doing the Ming Boz campaign, kind of hiding her in Waltz. That's gone now. They're engaging. And she cannot let Trump out-tough her because that can be a problem. And then there's a psychology in it with female candidates. Talking about the first female president, there's a lot of history of governor races as opposed to Senate races where female candidates are somewhat harshly judged with in my view, phony perception that they're not as tough as their male counterparts. So Trump's trying to play that card, and the disorder and chaos around the world, if it's not handled right, could help him. And, that would be unfortunate because, of course, there'd be more chaos around the world if he ever slithers his way back into the Oval.
Bob, it's a month since Labor Day, which is when campaigns traditionally kick into high gear, and a month until the election. And yet nothing seems to move the needle. Nothing seems to budge. Whether it's national polling or state by state polling, there's just not a lot of movement. What do you account for that?
The fact that we are deeply divided, incredibly polarized nation. If you win by 7 points today or 6 points in the popular vote, that would be a landslide. Compare that to Reagan winning by 10 in 80, or Johnson and Nixon winning by 20 in 64 and 72. I mean, that kind of result's impossible now. I mean, I hope we get back to a politics where that kind of result is thinkable, but it's going to take a long time. My sense is that the big thing that happened this month, and I don't know that the memory of it will last all the way till Election Day, I hope it does, was that debate. Because if you wanted to see strength in that, vis-a-vis Harris and Trump, you watched that debate. It reminded me of 1960 when Kennedy went into the first debate, with Nixon having this big advantage on experience. Experience counts. And Kennedy emerged from that contest as someone who had passed the threshold and was seen as a plausible commander-in-chief, which is what he had to do. Trump, Mike and I think may slightly disagree on this. I think Trump may be tempted to accept another debate if he begins to fall behind. My own view is that he would be foolish to do that. From just a purely practical point of view, I don't think he can do well at a debate. All you have to do is watch him all the time. I mean, he got up at his convention. He had a golden opportunity. And they wrote a speech for him, which was supposed to be a unifying speech after the assassination attempt. And he got about 15 minutes into it, and it was playing very well in the country, I think. And he looked down at the convention floor, and all these people weren't jumping up and down and roaring and screaming. So he just threw away the speech and lapsed right back into his stump speech.
Yeah, I actually think whoever's losing 10 days from now or thinks they're losing is going to want to debate. And I think the J.D. Vance, with his fairly polished debate performance, did himself a huge disfavor with Donald Trump, who now has to read about how somebody is a better looking, smarter general than Stalin. Stalin doesn't like that. So I think it's killing Trump to see all that. And I think Trump will want to grab the mic and debate again, particularly if he doesn't think he's winning.
Well, Mike, but what we've seen in the Trump campaign is that things just kind of get nuttier and meaner. We saw they've doubled down on the immigrants eating pets. And then on the Hugh Hewitt show again, he was talking about people coming through, quote, an open border, 13,000 of which were murderers. Many of them murdered far more than one person, and now they're happily living in the United States. Now a murderer, I believe it's in the genes. We've got a lot of bad genes in our country right now. Here he is getting back to this sort of sense of who's got good genes and who isn't, determining who's a good person, who's a good American, and who isn't. At what point do people shut off or turn off to that?
Well, that's the challenge. I don't know which the greater tragedy is, that we have a presidential candidate of a major party saying things like that, or that a whole big chunk of the country agrees with him. That's the problem. I mean, to your original question to Bob about why is the race so close? Well, you have two huge forces colliding here. Kamala Harris has a constellation of forces. The Dobbs decision, there's a lot of energy on that. She's raising significantly more money. She has a campaign that is more competently managed. The Trump thing is kind of a circus. But Trump is riding one big, extremely powerful force. I call it a 100-mile wide wall of lava, slowly moving forward, hard to stop, which is people's alienation and frustration at the status quo, particularly around the economy. And, they blame Biden. Biden was in trouble not because of his age, but because people wanted to fire him over their perception of the economy, and they thought he was too old to do anything to fix it. So she is still connected to that. She's doing, I think, a pretty good job of trying to escape it. But people want to vote, they want to hit the ejector button, mostly on economic stuff. She's escaping some of it. The scariest poll number for Biden was always who's better at running the economy. And Trump, even though people don't like Trump, he's not popular, but was beating Biden by 15 points. Now, it depends which poll you believe, but she's narrowed it to single digits, though there's a new poll out with it back at 12 points. So it's better than it was with Biden, but it's still a problem. So they just may hit the ejector button on everything because there are a lot of angry people out there who want to vote for change. They don't believe the system cares about them. There's a lot of cultural anger in the working class, white, and increasingly Latino segment about liberalism and wokeism and all the different stuff. So among we college-educated white folks, we have overwhelmingly moved to the Democratic Party from the Republican. But among people that make a living with their hands, it's been the opposite. They've gone to Republican Trump populism. So there's more of a market for Trump stuff than I think a lot of us would like to admit because it's so toxic and awful.
I want to go to Bob in a minute, but if I can get a quick answer from Mike about whether or not the Republican politicians like Liz Cheney who are coming out and endorsing Kamala Harris, whether that makes a dent in the Republican vote at all.
Yeah, I think it makes a small dent because there are a lot of them, including people who I think even have more grip than my friend Liz, who served in senior national security positions in the Trump White House. You can't find a former general who was intimately involved in the Trump White House who's for Trump.
Why aren't they doing TV spots then?
Well, that's not really their decision. I think they may. That's what the various campaign entities have to decide. But it's tribal. You're not going to get Boston Red Sox fans to all stand up and say, I'm for the Yankees, but you may peel some. It's all about a permission structure for college-educated white suburban Republicans who don't like Trump to essentially hold their nose and vote for Kamala Harris. And the Harris campaign has been trying to send dog whistles that way. People like Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, some of the national security people, and hinting that she will take a more centrist tack on economic issues, particularly taxes, than people who have looked at her historic record think she would. She's been trying to move to the center to open a path to hold Trump not at 90% of Republicans, but to get him down to 80, where he probably loses. And so they're trying, but it's a hard sell. Hard to take off that Boston Red Sox fan and go Yankees, even when you're really mad at your team.
Mike, just when you think things couldn't go any lower, you see the disinformation being put out about FEMA assistance in the wake of Hurricane Helena. And now this, you have even Republican governors and senators saying FEMA's here, it's doing a great job. Thank you, Joe Biden. And yet there's something really malevolent about saying, oh, that's $750, that's all you're going to get, and you're going to have to pay it back. And no, they're not. They're giving the money to immigrants. They're not giving the money to you. No,
it's terrible. It's anti-American. It's toxic. It's incredibly bad. We have lost shame in American politics. Shame used to be a good magnetic field to police behavior. Nixon looks like Gandhi now in comparison because he had a sense of shame. The modern equation is I'm right, you're evil. And if you're evil, anything we do to stop you is heroic. And that becomes a license for epic bad behavior. And we have a media world now, particularly electronic and on the internet and, of course, cable television, where it's opinion journalism, which means, the hotter the opinion, the more clicks. And so we're in this feedback loop of ridiculousness. And half the time I want to blame pop culture, by the way, for rewarding this kind of behavior, because we're seeing a reality show television, cheap conflict presidential campaign. And I blame Andy Cohen, by the way. My wife gets mad at me when I say that, but I'm tired of seeing grown adults throwing drunken wine glasses at each other on party buses. But that's now, Trump's a reality star. Now we have a reality candidate for president doing all the same cheap tricks. And there's a market for it, hopefully not enough in the 7 states that matter.
Mike, what do you make of the cynicism of this disinformation in times of terrible crisis for the South?
No, it breaks my heart. I'm too old to learn Chinese, so I'm starting my lessons. This is a real corruption of the idea of citizen America voting and being able to self-govern. Now we're in the circus business here, and the guy with the silliest hat is competitive.
The New York Times just did a piece that many people said was long overdue about Trump's aging and his confusion and his speaking and his delivery, bringing in old pop culture figures like Charles Lindbergh, the sharks, the batteries in the ocean, and where he may be failing, if not physically, then in terms of how he's making mental connections. And I don't know how much of an impact that's making, because people don't seem to expect very much of Donald Trump in terms of coherent oratory.
Is that for Mike or for me?
Well, you can start, Bob, if you would.
Yeah, well, look, he was never great in terms of coherence. I mean, he had more energy in 2016, even maybe more energy in 2020, but he wasn't the kind of person who was giving speeches that would live in people's memory or live in the annals of history, except maybe for some of the worst things he said. We have to understand, and Mike said this. Number one, he has a hardcore base, and he's going to get 45, 46% of the vote, no matter what. And the one thing I would say that's not so good for him right now is, instead of reaching out in even modest ways, he's doubled and tripled down, as you suggested earlier, on all the other arguments he's making. From a political strategy point of view, it's kind of dumb not to try to widen your reach. And he's not trying to widen his reach. Do I think a lot of people are going to vote against him because he's incoherent? No. Do I think a lot of people are going to vote against him because he lies? I guess the Washington Post counted more than 30,000 of them while he was president. And maybe you could find 15,000 or 20,000 in this campaign because he repeats the same ones over and over again. But it's not going to hurt him with that hardcore base. The other thing I would say is we're seeing a major realignment in American politics. Harry Enton from the New York Times was on today talking about the fact that Joe Biden has a lead of 18 points among white college educated voters. That's unprecedented. I mean, it's never happened before. I mean, Biden won them, but not by anything like that margin. And I think if the Republican Party goes down, if Trump doesn't win and the Republican Party stays Trumpist, it's going to be tough for Mike and Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger to get their party back to a place where it will be a plausible governing party in this country.
And Mike, I've heard this often, that if you really want to revive the Republican Party, vote against Trump.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of the permission structure, which is, it's like a lot of conservatives are not excited about Kamala Harris based on kind of her background and her ideological positions, but it's a pretty small price to pay to get a reasonable right of center franchise back. Because I think if Trump does lose, we'll have a fight against the populists going forward, but the traditional Burkean conservatives will have a shot at a comeback. On the Trump age thing, though, I'm a little more optimistic than Bob that it's hurting him, because we kind of created this age monster in American politics and we watched it eat Joe Biden. There's still, it's now a relevant thing. Trump is not nearly as sharp as he used to be. And one of the best poll numbers for Harris, because in these polls, and we should talk about this a little, professionals, we don't obsess on the ballot question of who you're going to vote for. That gives you a good idea who was winning the noise meter a week ago when the poll was taken. But we do watch the attributes a lot. Who's better for your family? Who do you think is up to the job? Who cares about people like you? Who's better at running the economy? Well, there's one about who represents change and a new approach, and she was beating him by 15 points. She got to, on the NBC poll, which is a good poll, she got up to 47 on that. And for the incumbent vice president, in a time when people want to punish the party, to be seen as change and new in a grumpy country, that's gold. If she can push that a few more points, that could do it for her. So
Well,
the fact that she's seen as new generational change and he's old, the worst of the 50s and an old man, lacks the energy and physical capacity, and all the polling, she's polling way ahead. They ought to hit the gas on that, because I think that's going to be half of how she wins.
well, we'll go in a few minutes to some of the questions that our viewers are putting into the Q&A box, and we'll pose those questions to you. But for each of you, I want to ask first about Trump and Elon Musk, who seems to have turned Twitter, into a campaign organ for Donald Trump. And then I want to get to your own strategies about the Harris campaign. So does the Musk appearance with Trump move anything? There are a lot of laughable memes that have come out of it. But
you know what I think it moves? It moves a lot of people who were otherwise inclined to buy a Tesla to buy a different kind of electric vehicle.
No, that's true.
I mean, if you're on the Tesla board, and he didn't completely control the thing, you call him in and you'd say, you can't do this stuff. You're going to hurt our bottom line. Yeah. I do not think he's going to get a lot of votes for Trump. And I think Twitter is probably overrated. And it's certainly a shadow of what it was before Musk turned it into a sewer. He's going to tweet this stuff out. He's going to get himself in trouble, by the way, with the FEC when he says he wants to give people $47 if they vote the right way, if they join up with Trump. I mean, he doesn't understand how any of this works. It reminds me of, I think it was FDR who talked about the wealthiest people in the country wanting to buy the government. That looks like what he's doing. So I don't think it helps him at all.
Well, I think we have found one immigrant who's creating problems in America then.
It's interesting to me. I do a lot of work in the electric vehicle space. I'm from Detroit originally. I run something called the EV Politics Project, evpolitics.org, if you're curious. And I guarantee you the chief marketing officer of Tesla is sitting there at his desk with a bottle of whiskey and a revolver, because their sales are declining. I actually had somebody in Los Angeles call me up and say, I'm selling my Tesla today. What should I get? And if you look at the sales figures, Ford is now the #2 EV brand in America. Hyundai, Kia, who make good products like Ford does, and General Motors are all skyrocketing in EV sales within the market. BMW is doing well too. So this is terrible for Tesla, but nobody can control Elon because he essentially controls the company as a plaything. As far as helping Trump, no, I don't believe it does. Although I will say, Trump is demagoguing the electric vehicle issue with a little help from the left-wing nuts who run the United Auto Workers. And he's created this scary monster, and it's hurting Kamala Harris in Michigan. I'm more worried about Michigan than I am about Pennsylvania. The Harris campaign has done an awful job of responding to this. She said something in her Flint speech, but Trump and Vance are there every week saying, if you're an American auto worker, you're going out of business thanks to this left-wing EV stuff. And without a pushed back message, and by the way, there are 20,000 new EV jobs in Michigan on the way to 40. The truth is the opposite. If we don't compete in EVs, there will be no Ford Motor Company in 15 years, no GM. Those plants will all be gone. So it worries me because I think Elon is kind of helping him in the micro Michigan politics, which is all you could need to throw the election. So I'm hoping the Harris campaign wakes up. A lot of us are yelling at him about it because they can win this argument. The facts are on their side, but they got to tell the story.
All right. So we have a sense of what you think some of the strategy the Harris campaign needs to embrace. Bob, you're the high price guy, but we're going to get some free insight from you about what you think, think the Harris campaign strategy should try to do from here on out.
I'm not high priced, at least anymore. I think Mike made a very important point a while ago, which is she is seen as the change candidate. And that can be interpreted in one of two ways, either generational, as Mike suggests, or as a change that takes us beyond the era of Trump, COVID, and all the economic difficulties that we've had. I think it's, aside from dealing with specific issues like the one Mike cited with electric vehicles in Michigan. I think her big meta theme has to be about change. And I think they're very smart, by the way, in what they've done with the media. You know, a lot of the legacy media or the mainstream media was furious because why isn't she sitting down with my editorial board? Because my editorial is going to decide who people are going to vote for. Doesn't work that way anymore. Yeah. You know, going on that podcast yesterday, she reached people that I think would otherwise be very difficult for a presidential candidate to reach. Sure, she can do 60 Minutes, but doing The View, for example, is going to help to motivate turnout and is going to reach people who are relatively, in many cases, low information voters. And she's going to introduce herself to them. You know, in 1960, 52, there was some advertising from Eisenhower. Stevenson didn't like it. 60, there was a real television campaign. Kennedy's was more efficient and probably more effective, but it was a lot of money was being spent on it. And there wasn't a single newspaper I know of that was writing and monitoring those television ads, because the legacy press of that day said, we're not going to elect a president by, Adlai Stevenson called it selling soap the way we sell soap. That's just not appropriate. What really matters is what really matters is what I write in my news report tomorrow. Well, turns out that's not the case. And television became the dominant force in our politics for a long time. And now there are new forces emerging, not just social media, but people can create their own networks on YouTube. And they do. And they get hundreds of thousands of followers. In the case of this podcast yesterday, normally, I guess, about 5 million people. But I'll bet there were more than 5 million who will listen to it when Vice President Harris is the guest.
And one of the things that has happened too is that you can micro-target and more broadly target specific audiences. And we're seeing a very pronounced split in gender attitudes in this election, especially among young voters. So I want to get to some questions. Ruth and Judith and some others wants to know, are there not at least marginal numbers of female Republicans who might find Trump to be so offensive to vote against him, and whether Melania's pro-choice public declaration will go any distance to mend this? And let me go to Mike on that, because we saw Barbara Bush, Laura Bush part company with their spouses over reproductive rights. Didn't seem to make any difference. What about all of this and the gender vote?
Well, I'd like to polygraph Melania because I think she's voting for Harris. I bet money on it. So I'm not joking. Look, there is some of that in the polling data, though we make a mistake with the choice issue. We assume it's completely a gender issue. The most pro-choice cohort in American politics is men under 35. Young men are more pro-choice. The one group that, and send all your angry mail to Bob Shrum, but the one group that is invisible in American pop culture, on television and in movies, other than occasionally playing a villain, is pro-life women. And it's still pretty significant at the polls. Now, it's about a 60-40 thing in terms of 60% pro-choice to pro-life. Kind of depends on how you phrase questions and stuff. So the Dobbs decision is a huge political hammer for the Democrats in really all of these swing states to different degrees. So, that the voters who are there don't need a lot of Republican permission structure. The problem is, for every suburban female Republican who's decided to be a Democrat on the choice issue, there is a UAW white male Democrat voting for Trump. That's the exchange. American politics is a two-lane highway with two bumper-to-bumper streams of traffic going 100 miles an hour. White and Latino working class people, particularly Latino males, some African-American males, problem for her, racing to Republican populism, while suburbanite, college-educated white people are racing to the Democrats. So we see the good news in the poll, which is, my God, as Bob noted, all of a sudden we've turned into the Bush Republican Party with white college-educated people but there's a slipstream the other way. And so quickly to the question how to win, one is Bob's right. Change not only of generation, but change of tone of politics. The big secret to the vice presidential debate, which really didn't mean anything, they never do, was in all the meter groups the campaign had, wiring people up so they'd react. The real thing was, I love this debate. They're nice to each other. Why can't we be nice? So if she can do the Ted Lasso versus evil Voldemort campaign, that's gold for her. And they did it at the convention. They've kind of slacked off. The other thing is middle class economics. She's got to prevail there, and they've been playing catch up, but I think they know that.
All right, let's go to Bob for the next question, which comes from several people, Rhoda and Larry among them, whether RFK Jr.'s support is helping or hurting Trump. And I think we can add just the general third-party candidate question, people like Jill Stein in Michigan, and how this is going to play when we see in swing states that, as Mike has said, razor thin.
I don't think RFK Jr. has had much positive effect, if any, for Donald Trump. He apparently can't even get his wife to support Donald Trump, or perhaps even to stay with him. He's just had terrible press since he endorsed Trump. And the scandal involving this New York Magazine writer, it's all been bad news for him. So I don't think he's a big asset. If he's an asset at all, he may actually be a liability. I think African American voters, for example, which is where he got a lot of support at the beginning because of his last name, have figured it all out. And Mike and I probably disagree on this. I think she will end up with north of 90% of the African American vote. However, Pat, you're right that if these states are very, very tight, Michigan, the one Mike keeps talking about, if Michigan's very, very tight and you get 20, 30, 50,000 votes for the third party candidate, that may enable Trump to carry the state. So it's a threat.
That happened with Hillary in Michigan, didn't it? With Jill Stein?
Well, yeah, but the Hillary campaign, and I wouldn't spend a lot of time on this.
Well, yeah,
they didn't poll in the last 2 weeks in the battleground states. That's malpractice. They just relied on data analytics. And secondly, they didn't do the last part of their message. The Trump's a bum part they kept doing, and they were so fascinated after the Access Hollywood tape that's all they did. Yeah. And they never communicated any kind of economic message that was persuasive to people.
There were also points I want to ask Mike about people voting versus not being allowed to vote. A great deal of effort going into a lot of states like Florida, scraping voter registration. Today I saw on Twitter a Georgia man, a Republican, who said, I voted in the primary, and yet now I find that I'm not on the voter rolls in Georgia just a few months later, and had to go remedy that himself. How much of a factor is that going to be, this aggressive effort to deny voters the right to vote?
Just quickly on the third party stuff, Kennedy has no grip, but I worry about Cornel West because I think there's Trump money coming into Philadelphia, Detroit, and Atlanta with a big visibility campaign for him to chisel off a few points in those critical Democratic counties. So I'm a little worried about that. I'm always worried about Jill Stein, as you say, in these close races. On the vote suppression stuff, everything is a factor. I think it'll be a small factor. It's the kind of thing that leads to easy hysteria in the media coverage, but it has all the makings of a paranoid plot and everything. And there is some stuff, and a bunch of us in the party have opposed it in some of the southern states, but it is Kamala getting her message right will have 100 times the positive impact that'll have of a negative impact, I believe.
Let me also put this to Mike, and then we'll go back to Bob. Philip's question is, what threat does J.D. Vance present to the resurgence of a conservative Republican Party post-Trump, whether he should win or lose? Because there's a whole lot of conservative religiosity, Catholic or Christian nationalism in a lot of the support for J.D. Vance, who's seen as a comer in those circles.
Yeah, well, after the debate, he's kind of a star now. So again, I think Trump might have a plan for him. And Trump will blame him if he loses. Not that Trump will ever admit he loses. But Vance will be a player going forward. The question is, this populism without Trump loses some of its appeal. I think the scariest thing about J.D. Vance, I know him pretty well. He called me to run a campaign for him for Senate in 2017 as an anti-Trumper Republican. I remember from the anti-Trump stuff. He was #1 recording secretary at the meetings and gave a good speech every time. So he doesn't believe in anything, so he's capable of being anything. But I don't believe that Donald Trump will let him leave this election, whether they win or lose, undiminished. And I think that'll be the next chapter. But yeah, he's a rising star, and there are others. And there are all kinds of different flavors in what a Trump-free party would look like. But step one is Trump-free, which means Trump has to convincingly lose this election.
Bob, a lot of us remember what happened in the 2000 election and the days and days after the polls closed of counting and not counting and the Supreme Court being brought in. I'm thinking, are we going to have to multiply this by 20 or 25 states in the 2024 election when you have election boards who have been re-engineered to support Trump, when you have questions about, like the one that Eric from LA brought up, the hand counting of ballots required over and over in some states, and Republicans showing up at the polls and then showing up at the counting of the ballots thereafter, saying we want to make sure that nothing goes awry.
Yeah, I think this is exaggerated too at one level. Georgia has said, well, we're going to open the boxes or the machines first, and we're going to hand count the ballots before we put them through the automatic counter, and we'll compare them. And people say, well, it's going to take them a month and a half. But a judge in Georgia has just said they have to certify these, each individual county has to certify their results by November 12th. So what will happen is it won't be just Republicans going into court, although they're already in court all over the place. They're mostly losing on this stuff. It'll be Democrats going into court to compel the people to do their ministerial duties. I mean, this woman in Colorado was just sentenced to 9 years in jail because she opened her machine her voting machine to Mike Lindell, the
pillow guy,
yeah. And I suspect that some election workers will be afraid to run that risk. So at the end of and by the way, you mentioned the Supreme Court. Whatever I think of this Supreme Court, I think that a majority of the court would think it foolish to do a reprise of Gore v. Bush, except if they interfered in an overt way to install Trump in the White House, it would be Gore v. Bush on steroids.
And so, Mike, what about the idea that the election may be won or lost not at the polls, but in the counting, just as in we saw the voter suppression before the election?
Yeah, I'm going to rant and rave for a minute now. And again, any angry emails go right to Bob Shrum at USC. First of all, nobody hates Donald Trump and wants him to lose more than the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp. They're blood enemies. Kemp wants to run for Senate. Trump, if he's the president, will do everything he can to screw him, including a primary. So the plot to fix Georgia, I think, is drastically overrated. But this is how I made a career out of running campaigns against Democrats. And the old John Stuart Mill joke about the British politics, that Labour's the stupid party and the Tories are the evil party. Well, now the Republicans are, in my view, currently the evil party, but the Democrats are the neurotic party. And they're more than happy to have a pearl-clutching nervous breakdown about stuff like this. So here's the plot to screw us. They're going to use special voltage. They're going to do it. And by the way, maybe they are. But the best way to do them is to get over this stuff and fight. Everybody asks me when I stop, anywhere in LA, well, you're an expert. What do the polls say? The polls say one thing. You're 1 point behind. Get off your ass and go fight. Go knock on doors in Michigan. Go knock on doors in Philadelphia. Do stuff rather than kvetching about this stuff where complaining about it on MSNBC is not going to move the needle of the election. So I would put the nervous breakdown about the secret plot to steal the election aside, and I would work harder. Because Republicans from third grade, we are trained no matter what happens, don't think, grab the sharpest object you can and attack forward. Don't have a meeting about how we're losing.
Metaphorically.
So that's my I want her to win rant to my Democratic friends. So
Well,
again, angry email to Bob.
one difference, Bob, from January 6th of 2021 is that is that Trump would not be the incumbent president. But are we looking at a risk of that kind of demonstration of violence if Trump loses the election again?
Well, he summoned all these people to come to the courthouse in New York when he was being tried, and almost no one showed up. Joe Biden will be the president. Kamala Harris will be the vice president. The Congress has already passed the Electoral College Reform Act, making it clear that, for example, the vice president's function is purely ministerial, and that you take the electoral votes that the states submit properly certified and you count them. And the Department of Homeland Security has already declared January 6th a day of national something or other. And there will be National Guard in the streets of Washington if there needs to be. There will be police deployed right away. None of this, the reprise of January 6th, I think, is the least likely thing. Now, what I do worry about, and Mike may say I'm a neurotic Democrat, and I'm not actually. I'm a pretty hopeful Democrat right now.
You're not too bad.
Yeah, I'm hopeful actually, but I do worry about random acts of violence. I do worry about the people who tell pollsters or focus groups that yes, it would be justified to use force if Trump doesn't win. Now, do I think they would gather as a huge mob? No, and I think they would lose if they did. But do I think there could be isolated acts of violence or some shootings in places where people are vulnerable? Yes, I hope to God it doesn't happen, but I think it could.
We have a question that I'll put to Mike from Greg, who says, is the horror show that is Project 2025 resonating with anyone other than college-educated voters?
Yeah, it's kind of surprised some of us. It kind of took off a little. Old political wags like Bob and I thought it was a little bit too much of an inside play, but it's kind of fit this thing that Trump has crazy people around him who have crazy plans, which is true, by the way. In the first Trump administration, there were a fair number of grown-ups who went in under the argument, well, we got to surround this wacko and we can control the policy. They're all gone now. They know he's unfixable. So there's a real risk of not great staff quality in there. So I don't think it's the crux of the election. I mean, both parties fall victim to narcissism. They like to talk about issues which the people who are already going to vote for them get excited about. But 2025 project thing has had some grip. Now, if she can't convince a millwright in Pittsburgh that she's better for their family than Donald Trump, who they remember as running a better economy for them than the Democrats do, she's going to lose. But 2025 as a way to increase risk of Trump as an offset is it's a double. It's not a home run. I thought it would be a bunted single. So it's not unuseful, and I think they've squeezed it for a lot of use of success.
I'm looking at the clock here, and we have to reserve a couple of minutes at the end for each of you to tell us something positive. But we're all breaks for an October surprise. Anybody jumping out of a cake and yelling surprise? What are we going to be seeing?
Well, we're having a surprise right now. I mean, the vast expansion of the war in the Middle East. Mike talked about the effect on potentially Lebanese Americans who are Christians. That's one surprise. Trump's atrocious performance in the debate was the September surprise. But we live in an unpredictable world. I mean, something could happen. Something could happen overseas. It doesn't look to me like we're going to have a big domestic crisis, although we got the next hurricane coming. And it's going to do some real devastating damage in Florida if it behaves the way people are predicting. And then there will be a judgment made about how the administration is handling this. Trump will try to connect it to Harris, and he'll say, even if they're doing a good job, even if Brian Kemp says they're doing a good job, even if Tom Tillis says they're doing a good job, he'll say, yeah, they're doing a terrible job. Planes are not allowed to land. They won't help anybody in a red area. I mean, but I don't know that people are going to buy this. I think they aren't.
Yeah, it's hard to call. I think the foreign stuff is the most. I mean, look, the Chinese proved last week they can hack our public utilities. So there could be some crazy cyber thing. The hurricanes are dangerous, particularly if there is an actual, not an imagined failure of some kind. If Tampa and the Tampa Bay really gets, God forbid, we hope not suffered. The Israeli conflict, they're beheading Hezbollah now. Tactically very smart. Strategically, it's Israel's getting more isolated. Maybe Hezbollah decides if we're going down, we're going to play the martyr game, and it's time for some buses to start exploding in Manhattan, Miami, and Chicago. They're capable of that tomorrow. They escalate to us. Now we go hammer them back. American planes are involved. Does the country say we want Trump the hammer, or do we want Kamala and a thoughtful team? Because this thing is wildly escalating and Americans are dying. Asia, we got a lot of Asian navies bumping ships into each other with a culture of never backing down right now. Every time the Joint Chiefs war plan Taiwan, we lose the Pacific Fleet, and 55% of the times we lose the war. So we have the emergence of Chinese power now. So there's a lot of international powder keg stuff that could really shake up the presidential election. But I think, and I'll speak on behalf of our viewers, what the real October surprise could be is we find out what the Blue Duck Society is, whatever the hell Shrum's got in his lapel there. I've been trying to figure out what the Blue Duck is.
It's just, I think it's a bird, not a duck.
Okay,
but
I can't
it's
tell.
blue, and
it's not a Twitter bird, is it?
No. Well,
Okay.
actually, I like the Twitter bird, and I like Twitter when it was Twitter a lot more than I like it when it's X.
I'm wondering about the movie The Apprentice, which is the Donald Trump feature film that he tried to suppress.
I think it's coming. It's going to come so late in the process that I don't think it will move a lot of votes. And Mike and I have said tonight, well, X won't move a lot of votes. Y won't move a lot of votes. Z won't move a lot of votes. But you know what? If they move a few votes, and there are several things that move a few votes, that could make all the difference.
Right. Exactly.
All right. So they'll be able to blame Hollywood again. Can we get about a minute of something optimistic and hopeful from each one of you, maybe starting with Bob?
Well, first I want to say something about Joe Biden. Mike's talked about how people feel about the economy. Objectively, he's had a better economic performance than his predecessor, than Donald Trump. He's gotten very little reward for it in terms of public opinion. But I think, like Harry Truman, he'll get a lot of credit in history. Truman left office with terrible approval ratings, and he's now thought to be a great or near great president. My other positive note would be that I think the Harris campaign has done a very good job of modulating their approach, introducing her to the country, now putting her out there for interviews, and putting her out there for interviews where they can reach voters who otherwise might not turn out or otherwise not be exposed to her. And I think she's doing that in a context where she looks like the change candidate. She embodies change in so many ways. She looks like the change candidate. They're running on change, and they're now putting on television a lot of spots about the economy.
Okay.
So I think they're doing the right thing.
We're going to have to move over to Mike for that. Your positive assessment, your optimistic, hopeful look.
Number one, just a quick kudo to Biden, because he's in a business where you never quit. The way to get ahead, you suffer insults for 30 years. It's very hard in politics, and the people who never quit win. And they told him he had to quit. Hardest thing possible. He did it. He's a patriot. I give him great respect for that. No, very few people in American politics put their own ego and interest aside. I am optimistic because I think, and I have a few more critiques than Bob of the campaign, but I think the odds that she wins are now slightly higher than the odds that Trump wins, even though it's close. And there is light at the end of the tunnel to end the year of Trumpism, to both free the Republican Party and save America from a crooked, rapist, con man, possible Soviet or Russian asset in the Oval Office. So I'm starting to feel a little more hopeful that our long national nightmare of Donald Trump could be over.
Gentlemen, thank you both. We'll have occasion to check in with you again, and we'll see whether your optimism is justified. Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone for watching on this anniversary of such significance, and with a month yet ahead of us. Be sure to watch us on Wednesday when we're talking with Rick Hasenmore, and Olney's talking about the chances of a peaceful transition of power. This is the man who's the expert about pollsters and election processes in the United States. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for supporting these vital programs. I'm Pat Morrison.